Hello, welcome to the Multiculturalism and Multilingualism panel. And we're just going to start by introducing ourselves. I guess I'll start. I'm Sara, I'm from Portugal, and Portuguese is my first language. I'm doing the content in this channel in English, although I do talk about Portuguese history a little bit, but we're only about 10 million in Portugal, not a lot of people. So it would be a niche language within a niche interest. And I figured I would have a bigger audience speaking in English. And I got into costuming through reenactment, medieval reenactment. And then, the pandemic happened to everyone, no events. And I just decided to start something a bit different. So who's next?
Alisha, you want to go?
Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Alisha. I'm from the UK. Pretty boring, really. It's just a boring language everyone speaks. So yeah, my first language is English, and like some weird Caribbean dialects because I'm like a weird diaspora person. So I'm from like 50 different places. So I will mainly just speak in English on my channel because it's just the language that a lot of people know. It has the most reach, and I feel confident speaking it. I'll use Spanish as well, but mainly in like subtitles. I can go back and make the grammar look nice and not look like an idiot trying to speak Spanish. And yeah, I'll probably like put in like bits and pieces of other languages, like the cultures I'm from. But like I'm speaking in English because I don't sound like an idiot then. And I got into like historical sewing just through studying fashion, just being into like alternative fashions like Lalita and things like that. Just being a history nerd and wondering what are people wearing?
Cool, so my turn. So my name is Julij. I run the channel of the name just Julij. So that kind of makes sense. I'm from Poland. My first language is Polish, but I also know English pretty fluently, I would say. I know some basics of Russian and poor excuse of Spanish, but I wouldn't hold myself accountable to knowing that language. I use English on my channel. For the majority of my content right now is pretty universal, like Western fashion, with some bits and pieces of me just wanting to do something different and more connected to Polish history. Right now, I am moving more in the area of talking about Polish culture, Polish fashion, Polish history, and just overall. I'm starting to move more to the Eastern European side, which I am a part of, so it kind of makes sense for me. As to how I got into costuming, I was bored during the pandemic, I guess. I kind of just learned how to sew and moved immediately to historical fashion because why not? And probably by like my fourth sewing project, I decided, yeah, I'm going to make a YouTube channel and try doing all that things.
Whoa.
Yeah, I'm not really. I try to kind of hold myself as a kind of beginner, but not really. I'm just kind of vibing at this point.
That really was full speed ahead.
Yeah, some people are surprised. I'm just the kind of like, I always wanted to do YouTube, so I wanted to learn editing and stuff like this, and it was just my interest at the time. So I kind of went with it. Why not?
Yeah. Do you have any background in video? Any of you?
Nope. Aside from the fact that since I was a kid, I kind of always wanted to go into YouTube, and I had like sporadic bursts of wanting to edit or animate or do more gaming or something like that. I was this close to becoming a Minecraft YouTuber. That's a story for another time. I'm glad I didn't went that way, because when I had that idea, I think I was too young. so I'm kind of happy I kind of stuck to this thing. So yeah, I'm just a weird person in general. So.
I guess I have a bit of like video experience, and my degree is not directly related to video, but I've had to use like the Adobe Suite and Premiere Pro and like all that software during my like time at university. So I know a little bit, but I'm not gonna say my videos are edited well or anything. Just they're serviceable.
Yeah, I studied multimedia arts, so there was a little bit of everything multimedia. There was video, there was sound editing, there was photography, a little bit of animation. So not enough to be an expert, not to be super comfortable in anything, but we got to sample all of those areas, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's fun. My whole school, I had to learn maths and physics, and now I'm going to college for architecture, which I'm kind of making fun of. Like historically, architects did like everything. The thing is, like when I'm reading about like Victorian designers, I'm like, yeah, this person designed all those costumes for masquerades. They were also an architect, but they did costumes because they were bored. And I'm like, yeah, that checks out with just the architects I know. That's
Yeah, and if you look at 19th century clothing, there's a lot of architecture there. So it's not far-fetched that architects would then have that hobby as clothing designers.
I like old buildings and just old things. So it was like, well, I like old things, so buildings are in this category, so why not this? I was an artsy kid, so I kind of was like, okay, where can I draw but not be an artist, because that is hard to earn money from.
And it's very stressful.
Yeah.
So I have more or less a list of topics to kind of guide the discussion of the panel. So we already talked about what is our first language and what we use in our videos. In the case of the two of us, me and Julij, English is our second language. In the case of Alisha, is the first language, but you also use your second language. And what do we think? We already mentioned a bit of the advantages of using English. We get to have an international audience, and it's more interesting, even when we are speaking about national history and dress and traditions. It's always more interesting to open an international dialogue. At least.
Yeah, also, the thing is, historical fashion in itself is, even though we kind of, when we are in this niche, we kind of feel like it's so big, it is a tiny space on YouTube. And this tiny space operates pretty much only in English. For example, in Poland, I mean, the biggest Polish costumer everybody knows is Karolina Żebrowska, which I like to say her name because every time I hear her mention, the name is so butchered. Oh my god!
Oh yeah, I'm one of those people I can't say properly.
I mean, I'm not surprised. She has a difficult surname to say, but yeah. The thing is, she also makes content in English. There are, maybe I came across like 3 YouTubers that do historical fashion in Polish on YouTube. And all of them had maybe around 100 subscribers. And the thing is, if you speak English on YouTube and have around like 100 subscribers, you can see the possible growth. In Polish, I'm not sure those people are ever gonna get more than 1,000. Like I have like 840 subscribers right now, which is not a lot, but I would not accomplish that in this amount of time, which is like almost 2 years now. If I was speaking Polish, that would just not be possible because there are not enough people interested in it. And the far majority of people interested are like middle-aged women, which is also the case in English, but in English you have a little bit more of this. So am I a person, a middle-aged woman would like to watch? In my personal opinion, most of the times no, unless I'm doing purely sewing, but that's not really the case anymore. So I wouldn't have the space to grow unless I switched a niche if I was continuing to speak Polish.
And now that you are getting more interested in exploring specifically Polish dress and Polish history, do you second guess yourself in your language choice for your channel? Do you think that maybe this is a subject that would interest most to Polish people, so maybe I'm just leaving out or excluding an interested audience that probably doesn't understand English enough to listen to something that would interest them? Because I know I feel those things regarding my content that is specific to Portuguese dress and Portuguese history.
I honestly don't really feel that way. The thing is, I think the reason is I know the topics, like for some of the topics I want to speak about are so ingrained in the Polish culture or history that pretty much a lot of Polish people kind of know about them without ever even learning about them. So what I find interesting is I don't know anybody that does the content that I want to do now that I want to switch more to Poland and Eastern Europe. And the thing is, if a Polish person is interested in it, the average level of like understanding English is, I think, good enough for them to still watch me. The thing is, most of the information and stuff like that is in Polish. So a Polish person can reach into all the Polish sources, which that's great. The thing is, a person that doesn't speak Polish, I mean, they could translate the sources. The thing is, it would be very hard to find them in the first place without knowing the language, because some of the things are hidden deep into digital libraries, and we don't really have one big digital library for Poland. Pretty much every university or museum or something like that has, or region even, has their own little library. So you really have to know what you're looking for when you're researching topics in Polish, especially if they're not a part of the more mainstream history. So my goal right now is kind of, because I don't think anybody does speak about, like, for example, the fashion of the Polish nobles, which was completely different than the European fashion from like 16th to 18th century, maybe even the 19th, to be honest. People outside Poland often don't even know something like this existed, while in Poland we learn about this in school. So my kind of thing is I think I will rather educate the people that don't already know this than just give some extra interesting details to people that already kind of get the rough idea. So yeah, the problem is that this is not necessarily something people will search for, because people are not necessarily interested in learning Polish traditions and history. And the thing is, if someone happens to be interested, they can then find me, and hopefully, because I already have an audience that watches me for different reasons, maybe I can kind of interest those people in my culture and my history. So I'm kind of doing free advertisement for my culture. So yeah.
I think that's good. I'm interested in learning more about Polish history and culture and dress, and Caribbean as well. So could you tell us a bit more about your Caribbean heritage, Alisha?
Yeah, I guess I can. It's like culturally, I'm just a bit of a mess. So yeah, but basically colonization happened, and that just means I can lay claim to a lot of cultures. So like one of like the Caribbean countries is Jamaica, and like we have like a giant Dutch influence. Like our cooking pots are based off of like Dutch cooking pots. We literally call it a Dutch pot. So like I have this access to Dutch culture as well, and then it's all like a mess. It's just like great. And then I think because of colonization, a lot of them went over to India, so then I've got Indian heritage as well, because they all went over and traveled everywhere, and I've got like Southern American heritage as well, because like they're real very close to the Caribbean. My family like to travel a lot, so it's it's really nice in the fashion history kind of way, because there's so many different things, but also there's the through line of colonization, just like this really horrible thing, but it's like it's a nice kind of connecting through line. So I think at the moment I'm just going like, what country do I want to go to today? Let's see how Britain affected it. Let's talk about it for a bit, and let's make the nice dress.
So you're still choosing which of your many heritages to focus on?
Yeah, I tend to go between all of them, because it's very interesting, because like identity wise, that's interesting to think about. I think like a lot of the time, like you just look at me, I just look like generic. I don't really look like all the cultures I am. And I just get really salty about it. And I'm like, I need everyone to know, do not erase all the places I'm from. So it's just really weird, just me trying to like find who I am, but also look at the nice dress. Yeah, it's a mess.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And all my ancestors are pretty much from the same place, even if they were, for example, deported by, for example, the either under the Soviet rule or under the rule of the Russian, any stage of the Russian country, to be honest, or Germans.
Yeah.
Those are the two people that like to deport us. So even though I know some of my ancestors were, for example, deported or worked in forced labor camps or something like that, they always kind of came back. So, or didn't, but the one that I am related to came back. So still, like, I don't know about any kind of person in my family tree that wouldn't be Polish. Still, it might be just the case of me not knowing, but yeah. The thing is, I kind of experience a similar cultural like divide when it comes, but like on a very a smaller level, geographically even speaking, because my dad is from Greater Poland, which is Western Poland, and I kind of also live in a city that historically was owned by a lot of countries, went through a lot of influences, and it's just kind of a weird cultural space in itself. But my mom is from Mazowsze, which is a more eastern part of Poland. And I spent my whole life in Greater Poland, but all the traditions I was raised in were my mom's traditions from Mazowsze. And they are very different. So I'm kind of a person that, yeah, my culture, the culture I was raised in doesn't match the culture I lived in most of my life, which is very interesting in contrast with, for example, my friend that lives in like a smaller town in Greater Poland and is very much based in this tradition. When she like realizes that I don't know like some traditional food or something like this, even though I lived here my whole life. So those kind of situations are always fun. Or like, for example, hearing people say something from the Mazowsze dialect and be like, this sounds like a bad autocorrect. I don't think this is real. And me just like turning around and being, wait, you don't know what this means? Like, that's very it's such a it's literally the cities my parents are from are like 3-hour drive away, and already the culture changes so much. So I can only imagine how much the culture changes on this big of a distance.
Yeah. You mentioned the access to sources in Polish, and that was also one of the topics I had for the discussion, because for some reason I imagine that in every language that's not English, it would be as hard as it is to find sources in Portuguese, because it is very hard to find sources in Portuguese. That's why when I started reenacting, I was already fluent in English, so I didn't have a lot of problem looking for sources in English, but it was still frustrating because we were obviously a reenactment group in Portugal, doing reenactment of Portuguese historical events, of Portuguese characters and people, and we couldn't find almost any information about Portuguese realities. We could, on those very academic subjects, sometimes there are papers and even books written about daily life stuff, but things very specific to food, to clothing, to furniture, we couldn't find any of that in Portuguese. All our sources had to be foreign, and then we had to sort of figure out what was the most plausible for the Portuguese situation. Like, who were the royals then? Where was the queen from? What were the foreign influences that she was bringing with her? And then try to guess to which foreign source we were going to get our information from. But I'm glad to know that Poland doesn't have that problem that you have.
I mean, in Polish, it's kind of a different problem because there is still a lot less sources than in English. The thing is, I think Poland is kind of the place that in some ways has a similar problem, in some ways it has the opposite problem. As in, if you want to search things on Poland, you can probably find some things. As in, I don't know honestly how it is with clothing, to be specific, because the research I done was the 1910s, which was relatively not so long ago. So we had magazines and stuff like that. So I know how to research all those online libraries. So when it comes to 1910s, it was easy for me to find like old-fashioned magazines and stuff like this. I know that there are like a lot of medieval manuscripts and stuff like that, but I don't know anything on how this related to fashion, to be completely honest, because I'd imagine that the sources are so weird that sometimes you see a very old book on a topic that you wouldn't think would be even covered in a book, Other times you look for a very specific topic and there is no information on this. The thing is, in Polish, it's kind of, you can, if you want something to be specific to Poland, you have to search it in Polish. You won't find any information in English. Maybe some very abstract things, but most of the times it's still a Polish person writing them, because Poland is not at all in the center of attention when it comes to cultural stuff for the more English cultural circles. Like Eastern Europe as a whole is not something that Westerners find interesting, really. Now that, for example, well, now that Russia invaded Ukraine, this is the first time in my whole entire life when I actually see Western people show any kind of interest to Eastern Europe in any way, to be honest. And when I see people be like, okay, now that this terrible things happens, now maybe I actually will ask someone about the traditions and history. So because that interest didn't really exist, you won't really find anything in English. Also because of world wars, and then the Soviet rule, and we were occupied by Russia and Prussia and Austria for 123 years. And all those countries actively wanted to destroy our culture, performed like genocides, Germanization, Russification, all that kind of stuff. I imagine that there probably is a big hole when it comes to any kind of books or written materials, because they are just destroyed. The thing is, I can't say for sure because this is not the area I usually do research in, but there's a lot of things missing. Like, for example, when I see people buy antiques in the States in thrift stores, I'm like, this doesn't happen in Poland, because all those antiques that you buy in the thrift store, probably someone burned those kind of things to survive during one of the wars. So for a lot of things, those things just don't exist anymore. You can't get English information on it. The Polish information might have been destroyed. So that's kind of the thing. Also, the thing that we, for a long time, culturally, especially fashion-wise, weren't the same as Europe. You can't really do research in European fashion in the 16th century and try to translate it to Poland. Maybe Turkish fashion. That would be the best guess. Turkish fashion is actually a lot closer to Polish fashion at that time, because we had wars with each other. That's literally it. For some reason, it's such a weird relationship. When we fought each other for centuries, we had wars with each other, but at the same time, we had a very weird kind of respect for each other and loved each other's cultures. Or at least Poland loved some parts of Turkish culture, even though those people would never admit it. I don't know if it worked the other way around, but yeah. This is complicated.
Yeah.
Yes. The thing is, there is also the thing that with sources, there is a strange thing that there is definitely this kind of preconceived notion that anything that is important should be researched in English. And that's not just fashion, that's just overall. Like, for example, with computers, I don't know the name of the person, but under the Soviet regime, there was a person in Poland that really advanced computers. The thing is, they didn't speak English and all their papers were in Polish. So they never got acknowledged as to coming up with some of the things he invented. and all those things went instead to the first person that wrote about them in English. So this is not like a fake, because I did a video kind of about it, and some people still like don't believe this. Those people are English speakers, but that's, yeah. It's very much the case that people value things written in English as much more important, and they're less likely to question it. So most things are researched in English. The thing is, the only things that are researched are also the things that the English-speaking audience finds interesting. So if you're outside those circles, you probably will have a big gap in research because people are simply not interested, which is kind of sad.
Yeah,
because it's somebody's culture. So
that's true. But although I think sometimes people just aren't interested. Some other times they're not interested because they're not aware it exists. And once people know it exists and they can learn more about it, then they can get interested. But it's kind of hard to find something interesting that you never heard about.
Also, English speakers, we don't want to listen to things not in English. Like the amount of like foreign films that I translated into English speaking, because God forbid I will listen to a foreign film or read some subtitles. I'm an English speaker and everything must be in English. So I think a lot of people, if you only speak English, you just don't want to do anything else.
Yeah, that's also kind of a weak mentality, because if English is not your first language, you are kind of made to learn it. As in, like, it's you learn it in school most of the time, so you are obliged to learn it for years. So it's not kind of like, I can just not do this, because you still need a grade to pass. Sure, you might not care about it and be terrible at English, but you will still know something because you have to. So yeah, like for example, in Poland, I think the average amount of languages a person knows is between 2 and 3, because that's the amount of languages we typically would learn in school. Sure, the third language in school is a lot of times not a language you learn for a long time, and therefore, if you don't have special interest in it, many people like don't learn it to the same level that they know English. But nowadays, knowing English is kind of necessary to maybe not survive, but thrive in adulthood, for example. Like, I cannot stress the amount of times teachers, and not just like English teachers, just all of the teachers stressed how much it's important for us to know English. Especially I was kind of in a class that kind of intended to go towards more technical studies in college. So all the teachers stressed how important it is for us to advance in our careers, because many people nowadays, the companies are worldwide, and just people don't want people that can communicate with others across the globe. You can still get a really good job and advance without knowing English, but the opportunities you get are much smaller. Also, we kind of have this culture that many adults wish for us to emigrate, because the politics and economy, although are not terrible, are also not great. And because we can emigrate west when especially the economics are better, many adults now want for us to just emigrate to get a better chance at a career, which is kind of sad, to be honest, because the thought that you kind of have to, or are made to feel like you have to leave to do something great in life, It's sad when you
I
think
know,
about it more.
it's the same here.
I mean, it's I'm in the UK. Like my ancestors were like, well, there's no job opportunities and Britain owns us. Let's just take advantage and go.
Yeah, that's very true. And we have restarted. Oh, your complex heritage, Alisha. How do you go about finding sources? You speak English and Spanish? Sorry. You speak both English and Spanish, so do you research in both those languages?
Yeah, I tend to mainly do English because I'm most confident in it. And I think because the cultures I'm in were like colonized up the wazoo, a lot of things are in English. So in India, because there's like so many different languages, you learn English and you speak to someone else in English. You only really speak to someone else in like your native tongue if it's like they're from the similar place and they understand. So it's really easy to find sources in English. I found for like my upcoming video, I found like a whole dissertation about the traditional dress in English. I found like there's government like fashion videos. That was all in English because it had to be for the whole country, and that's like the language you go to, and I suppose everyone needs to understand. So I mean that makes it easy for me because I can't read Hindi. I can't read any of the other languages there. It's like I don't know. I know like 2 words, and that's it. That's it. It's like Southern American stuff. I do a bit of both, but I would default to Spanish first because I just feel that makes sense. I'm confident researching in that and like just finding other things. Yeah, for some videos I've done, I found more in Spanish. I think because like Britain loves Spain, they love to go to like Benidorm or like do their tourism thing. You'll get a lot of tourism websites in English and a lot of really surface level things. And finding really specific whatever things is difficult. I think so when I want to look up like specific names of like traditional outfits, I always like research a specific like Spanish name, and that's when you get like the specific images you want and not like the annoying tourism ones which are pretty, but that's not really what I'm looking for for an historical fashion video. So it's a bit of both, but predominantly Spanish.
Yeah, it's very interesting how in places that were like colonized by pretty much anybody, for some reasons with like colonization, a big thing is like destroying the culture that you colonize, but also there are so many cultures by colonizers. But there are so many resources by colonizers about the cultures they colonized. Like, for example, once upon a time, I really wanted to do research on my specific city. The thing is, during the Russian regime, there was a lot of research on folk as kind of a part of a propaganda. The thing is, this specific region wasn't explored as much as others. So I spent a lot of time trying to find any illustrations of photos of clothing that would be worn in this region. And the only illustration I could find was from an old Russian book about folk, which is kind of the same thing with colonization. I'm kind of lucky enough to know Cyrillic. So even if I'm not really good at the language, I know the letters, so I can kind of decode it. Just quite interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, and on the subject of colonialism, in your researches, Alisha, have you noticed any, like Yuli was saying, that colonial powers usually tend to try to erase the cultures they're colonizing? Have you noticed any of those attempts of erasure of the culture, replacing the traditional dress with a more English dress?
With India, not so much because I think basically Britain was like, India is on a next level, and we just got like a lot of stuff. Off the top of my head, there's a textile technique we call paisley because that's the area in the UK. We copied it, and that's not obviously what it's called in like the traditional language, and I can't think of what it's called off the top of my head, of course. So like a lot of words I use would be like, I suppose, English versions of that, but I feel more with the Caribbean, they've, because of like slavery and everything, and by the time everyone managed to settle there, it was so many different cultures already from different parts of the world. They would have already like lost their name. They would have had an English name. They would have lost their language. They would have only had English or other European languages to start off with. So it makes a lot of sense that their clothing is very European anyways, which I have to admit makes it kind of boring for me, which sounds kind of mean. I think I will visit it, but a lot of the time, like, oh, it's just Britain again. So I think I don't give them enough credit. Like, I don't know if you've heard of the whole like chemise a la reine discourse everyone was going on about, but a lot of research people are doing that kind of started from like slaves. It was outfits they made to work easier. They could move in it. That's why it's a lot looser, and it kind of went up the pipeline. And then like the slave owners and what's her name, Miss Queen, her head fell off.
Oh, Marie Antoinette.
She like really liked it, and that's how it became known as like the chemise a la reine. But like, it wouldn't have even got there if it wasn't for those slaves. But obviously, they weren't going to credit them. Why would they at that time?
Yeah, the thing is, I think also, I don't know the discourse, but from what I know about chemise a la reine, I think because most of the time when people actually get some things like clothing from slaves, then most of the time they don't want to talk about where they got it from. So yeah, from what I kind of understood when I initially learned about the dress was that it was meant to copy the peasants, which, I mean, French peasants were kind of, I mean, definitely better well off than slaves, but like even I think on the grounds or just peasants in Europe, they probably were better well off, definitely better than the Polish ones, because I'm pretty sure they at least had like basic rights.
I don't know.
They would have had a bit more
maybe
money.
They had a whole revolution and killed their kings over not being well enough.
That's also true. We had a massive genocide on the higher class once upon a time for a reason. I mean, it was triggered by like colonialists, which is very interesting, but it was kind of a revenge on the higher class for basically enslaving them, which is understandable. But just like hierarchy of the groups, they probably weren't like, they definitely didn't have it like the wars. But like I find it interesting that they still kind of found ways to make it seem believable and hide it at the same time, because like it makes it believable because the peasants also worked in the fields, and like you could use the same kind of explanation and just switch the groups. So I've never even heard about the about that kind of origin of this dress. So like it's very well hidden, like many things about colonialism, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's only really been talked about in the past like year, because I don't think I would have known unless other people who were really good at research would have found it. Otherwise I wouldn't have. Like, the only thing I could think of is like hairstyles. It's like the modern thing. But historically it is kind of difficult. All I know is like historically there was like a period where like Black women had to like cover their hair because they're looking too wealthy. Oh no, the people of color look rich and we can't have that.
Yeah.
So it's and then it's really weird. And what is it the 1780? No, the era where they crimped their hair. It's the same era with the internet when they crimped their hair to look more like Afro hairstyles, and then that's weird. This is a big mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is weird because, you know, through most history, you get fashion going from the royalty and aristocracy and being copied by the lower classes. And I don't know enough about that time period. My time is the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance. That's the period I'm most comfortable in. So 18th century and 19th century, not so much. But it's kind of a strange thing if it really is if it really is the upper classes copying the lower classes, especially the lowest class of the time. Uh, what I remember from art history classes about that dress was the scandal was mostly that it looked like underwear.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much all I know about it. It's that painting was very scandalous because it looked like the queen had been painted in underwear. It was indecent.
Yeah.
And that's the full extent of my knowledge about Chemise à la Reine.
Just like, honestly, I think hair might be much more controversial than clothing throughout history, because I often relate to like the West, but this happened in Eastern Europe too. So like maybe on a smaller level, on a kind of different way. But the higher classes have like a weird habit of taking things from other cultures. The thing is, sometimes it's in so unexpected ways that when you find out about it, you're like, why? For example, with hair, once again, with the Polish fashion being different, it was mainly the men's fashion. Women wore, sometimes they had kind of different dresses, but mainly there were the more European fashions. The thing is, they didn't really follow the hairstyles of Europe as much. And again, as with the like Turkish influence on the Polish nobility clothing, the Turkish influence affected the hairstyles of the women. So I read recently about how Westerners perceived Poland at that time, and there's like actual notes in diaries of, for example, Englishmen and Frenchmen, and like just Westerners overall, commenting on, well, there is kind of the stereotype of Polish women and like Slavic women being so beautiful and stuff like that. Which, I mean, I'm gonna agree because I'm from this place and I kind of have to, like, that is necessary for survival, but a very interesting thing is, I can't say this for 100%, but I think a lot of the stereotype stemmed from Polish women and Eastern European women dressing in a more Asian way, or doing their hair in a more Asian way. But because they were white, still technically, even though for a long time Slavic people weren't like actually considered white in States especially, but because we still have like a light skin color, but had much more actual influence from Asia and Middle East, Turkey. I think Westerners kind of started fetishizing, especially like Polish women, because of that, because they felt weird about saying that those barbarians, or whatever they called them at the time, were beautiful. But here you have a woman that looks like close enough to you, but who dresses kind of like those different people. And suddenly you're intrigued and you think that's beautiful, but it's only acceptable because that person is close enough ethnically to you, which is very weird. Like I've read those entries about especially like the Turkish style hair, and there is also a thing kind of culturally when Westerners would heavily criticize Polish men because we behaved more in a kind of Asian or Turkish and Middle Eastern fashion. For example, we really like to show our wealth with different decorative dishes, paintings, clothing, gold on our clothing or something like that. And at that time in Europe, they started prioritizing, looking like clean, not too many things on you, like you're wealthy, but you don't show your wealth through things, but like from the way that like you're very put together and stuff like that. So our men were criticized because for Westerners, we were just like, again, having those barbarian ways to display our wealth and stuff like that. The thing is, those same traditions that the women adapted was on the other hand seen as erotic, because the Western women were so reserved and had all this etiquette and stuff, and you couldn't get to them. While in Poland, still women had etiquette and stuff like that from Europe, or like Western Europe, but were much, and we kind of still are, much more straight to the point, much more much more I can't pronounce it, this word. They flirted more, they were more open and straightforward with those kind of stuff, combined with the more exotic or whatever Oriental looks.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Made
It sounds
them
like
really
Orientalism.
It is Orientalism. The thing that really is interesting about this for me is that we have Orientalism in Poland. Orientalism in Poland was basically the same as Orientalism in the West, as in we were fascinated with the Middle East, especially because we didn't really get as far east as like the stereotypical Asian countries that you would think today when you think Asia. At that time, Asia was more the Middle East, especially like Turkey and stuff. We have a lot of poems about the Turkish nature and stuff like this. The thing is, we kind of adapted from Turkish culture, but not really in the colonial way, because colonialists actually like went to Turkey and tried to take stuff from this. We had we actually interacted with each other, because like we had wars, but for some times we have been neighbors. We had trade with each other, and although not always positive, our interactions were much more natural, I would say. So I wouldn't really consider the influence of the Turkish fashion on Polish fashion to be colonialist-like. Sure, it's you could, I guess, take it to Orientalism, but those fashions were adapted even before Orientalism was really a thing. So I would consider it more an actual blend of cultures from just being next to each other and then going out of your way. In the West, Orientalism was very much going out of your way, like actually colonizing some parts of Turkey, all the princesses and stuff, like not only Turkey, but they actually like went more east, so like India also. But their kind of integration, I don't even think you can call it integration of culture. Their kind of assimilation of the culture was much more forced than what was happening in Poland. And what I find especially interesting is that Poland was one of the countries that would be considered East enough to be Oriental, as it is. Not like Oriental because they wanted to become Oriental, but like it's like, even though we are geographically speaking Central Europe, at this time we were considered basically the border between Europe and Asia. So it's weird to see Westerners apply Orientalism to Poland and seeing our traditions as Oriental and like the barbarian kind of thing. I really don't like that word, but like they use that word, so yeah. And then Poland considering themselves European and slightly Orientalizing like Turkey or the, I think, Ottoman Empire at the time. So it's like a kind of weird stage thing. Like it's not really clear where on the spectrum we are on. Because it's kind of, well, actually, I don't even know how to describe this. Because it's, yeah. Did we Orientalize or were we already Oriental? I have no idea. It's hard to tell.
It's an interesting geographic position to have all those neighbors and have all those different influences. In Portugal, the most interesting is in the Middle Ages, 14th and 15th century, when there was still an Arab kingdom in the Iberian Peninsula, and there were some Arabic influences in the Iberian dress, not just Portuguese, but in the kingdoms that are now Spain. It was curious that it was mostly traveling clothes and riding clothes, so the more sporty kind of things. It wouldn't be something that it was appropriate for an aristocrat to wear at court, but it would be appropriate for traveling or for just going out and hunting and riding.
Yeah, I think Spain and Portugal is also like an interesting place with all the Arabic influence. So I don't think there is another place in Europe that had this kind of history. I mean, Russia is a weird one because only a part of it is in Europe, though you could argue it's the part that started the country, because like the majority of Asia is just the colonialism, to be honest. But they were also invaded by Mongols, but I think they still were more in the Asian part of the world at that time. The thing is, it's a weird kind of place where I think because first the Mongols, but also the Ottoman Empire, or now Turkey, now we wouldn't consider they're European, but Turkey for a very long time was in Europe, at least part of it, especially like southern Eastern Europe. So they had a lot of, they influenced the fashions and cultures a lot. Like even if we look like Greek clothing or the Southern Slavic clothing, I mean, Poland is heavily influenced when it comes to this, and we're in the center, while the the Southern people, Slavic and not Slavic, because there are other ethnicities there are also, like Greek people, for example. But I find it very interesting how they had to be influenced by all that.
Yeah, and I think the Byzantine Empire was a bit of a weird concept, because it was for some things, and I'm not really sure in what I am saying because I haven't read about the Byzantine Empire in ages, but it was kind of European, kind of not so European, because it was the most direct inheritor of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they were so far east that the Westerners, here in Western and Central Europe, it was still a bit Oriental compared to what we were used to. It was still even more foreign than our foreign neighbors, the ones closest to us?
Well, it's kind of a weird topic of what is Europe, because when it were the Roman ages, like we have a completely different view on what is Europe and what countries are European now. People had a different view in the 17th century, like culturally and geographically. So like when it comes to Romans, I mean, we consider them European because a lot of our culture is based on Roman culture. The thing is, the Roman Empire wasn't just in Europe. Like a big part of the empire was in Africa, was in the Middle East. I mean, the most central part of it was in Europe, but like also mostly Southern Europe. Like, for example, the place I live in wasn't a part of the Roman Empire. I live on a like a path Romans would travel to the Baltic Sea, but we weren't actually a part of the Roman Empire, even though like Britain was a part of the Roman Empire at some point, and it's an island. Meanwhile, I think I am not sure if at the time of the Roman Empire, Slavic people already migrated to the place they are now, or was it different people at that time? But also the fact that Romans called us barbarians, which is also interesting how this word just keeps changing meaning all the time. And at this point, it doesn't mean anybody for me, to be honest. Barbarians are just like a way to see they are not a part of us. But like the place I live in wasn't a part of that cultural kind of place. But after Rome has fallen, we took parts of that culture also. So like it's a very weird concept. I mean, the majority of stuff, especially when it comes to geography and culture, is based on Europe. The reason it's based on Europe, it's also not Rome. It's all the colonial empires being based in Europe. So was Europe really Europe before colonialism? Like, it's kind of, Europe isn't really a real continent. Like, let's be honest. Europe isn't like a continent. Most of the time it's a very big island. Europe isn't even a very big island. We are literally a little part of the same continent as Asia. So like, it's such a weird concept, even though today we would think, well, it's Europe, it's a continent. What are you talking about? It's just, we kind of just decided what is what and what are we going to prioritize. So it changes whether we like it or not, and whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, and I think even way before colonialism, you can sort of feel a kind of European identity throughout. Like, people would, especially from the languages, like we have the Romance languages, it's all the same language family. And you have Romance languages from Portugal to Romania, because Romanian is also Romance language. It's often forgotten, but they also are siblings. And Romanian is very much Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's already that bond, that similarity between something as far west as Portugal and a country as far east as Romania. And then there are all those, there's the Germanic languages, there's the Nordic languages, there are all these languages that are similar, the Slavic languages, of course, all these languages similar enough to each other that sort of create that feeling that, okay, those are our neighbors. They might be a different kingdom, a different country, but they're similar enough to us their language kind of sounds like us, or the language sounds like the language of our neighbors on the other side. So there was enough similarities to have that kind of European, not really a unity, because, you know, how much we were fighting each other, there wasn't a lot of unity there, but the kind of identity there as a continent.
Yeah, but also we add Hungarian and Finnish and Baltic people to this, which speak languages that aren't even a part of European languages.
So weird.
I think more related to some languages.
And Irish, they're in completely different language
Yeah.
families.
I think those languages are more connected to the languages in the Middle East. And you're in the middle of Europe, like Hungary, for example, is like the middle of Eastern Europe. And like were there for centuries, but like you're not from here. I mean, Slavic people are very weird because nobody knows where we came from. Like, no, we're not from Europe originally. The best guess is that we came somewhere from Asia and adapted. But for example, the early, not really kings, but like the early people that ruled some of our tribes were Nordic. So like to this day, it's like it's a genetic mystery where Slavic people came from. We just kind of did come here and decided to stay. So
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, here in Portugal, it's just a huge mix because, you know, there were Neanderthals first, then Celts and Iberians, then the Romans, then the Arabs. No, then the Romans, then the Visigoths, then the Arabs, then Visigoths again. And then, of course, with colonialism, we just started mixing with everyone. Portuguese colonialism was mostly based on getting there and getting married, because we didn't have enough people to populate Portugal, let alone settle colonies. So
introducing fried food to a lot of places.
It's very interesting looking at the differences culturally between like Spanish and Portugal colonization and like the English one. Like the English, I'm sorry to or the like ethnically English people here, but like I don't know if it's just like that you guys are really mainstream or just boring.
They're boring. They were like, we need to steal the good food and then not use any of the spices. And we need to
oh god. You know what? In Poland we don't use that many spices, but there are still historical like diary entrances from Westerners being like, oh my god, the Polish food is there's so much seasoning, I can't even eat it. Like I don't, we sold our potatoes. It's still really use that many spices. To be completely honest, we pickle a lot of things. That is true. There are a lot of alcohol. Yeah, I guess it's also true. But like, I don't think we use that, but that much seasoning.
Like I feel like English food is like boil the life out of some vegetables, and it's just not nice. Anytime I make anything vaguely cultural, and if someone's just extremely British, extremely white, they're like, "This is the most amazing thing ever." And I'm like, I rolled some bread and like dough and water. I don't know. I don't know what I did. Maybe there's some salt in it.
It truly amazes me how a country's most known food, or not even food, just like a thing you consume, is tea, when tea is not even native to.
Oh yeah, like I think gypsies. I think the Portuguese were like, "Did you try frying things?" And we were like, "Ooh."
I mean, to be completely fair, with Polish food, we used to just eat meat until one of our kings married an Italian, And she was like, "Oh my God, what are you doing? Here are some vegetables."
That's amazing.
So for some time we didn't even eat vegetables. We just ate meat, just meat. So you know what? Maybe we needed. You know what? If we ate meat, just meat for so long, we had to have some good seasoning, because you have to season that. There's no other way. I don't know what they used at this time, but like.
I know Portuguese cuisine is pretty varied. Like we have each little town and village has its own culinary thing, has its own delicacy. So you never get bored with food in Portugal, and everything's delicious. You know, I'm biased, but yeah, everything is delicious. And yet there's a gastronomic festival every weekend. So you never get bored of eating here in Portugal.
Yeah. In Poland, I would say it's delicious, but also Polish food is very heavy and meat based. So also about the vegetables, the Italian queen, the queen has had so much influence that to this point, like if you buy a bunch of like the most basic vegetables, we call them włoszczyzna. Włochy is Italy in Polish. So we basically just call it Italian, and those are the vegetables.
Oh, I love that.
We are recording.
My camera quality is getting worse and worse because it's getting dark.
Okay,
So
it's already pretty bad, so it's okay.
Yeah. I actually prepared for that and put a light behind the desk.
yeah, I just like turn on just like a normal desk lamp, because I was just completely gray at some point in this call, and I was like, God, I am turning into a ghost actively.
Yeah, we're having too much fun and the sun's going down and hours are just passing. This is going to be the longest panel and I'm sorry for anyone watching.
Oh, I hope they like it.
I think we're still good on time, to be honest. Maybe let's do like one more topic and like can slowly try and put some kind of logical end to this conversation.
Yes.
I honestly don't know how to end it.
Since we've already gone into heavy topics like colonialism, I think we just should keep going downhill like that and end in a heavy topic like nationalism, because when we were having
Right.
when we were having our brainstorming chats on Discord, that was something that came up, and it's something that it's sorry. There was just a pop-up window coming up here. But yeah, nationalism, because whenever you start looking into your own heritage and your own culture, especially in Europe, you're always going to run into that crowd. And it's like in reenactment, there were those people. Most people are actually nice and truly interested in history, but there's always those bad eggs.
The thing is, I just want to say that before we like dive in deeper, there are two types of nationalism, because there is the nationalism that stems from your you want to. You think your nation is the best and you want to enforce that upon other nations, which we have like things like Nazism in this category. But there is also the nationalism that kind of blends with patriotism, which often stems from being the one that is oppressed and therefore kind of overreacting, like holding your culture more deep, more close to you than normally people would, as a kind of defense mechanism. So, for example, I think when it comes to Ukraine, I mean, I think this is the case in a lot of parts of Eastern Europe when there's kind of this weird overlap with nationalism, where most of the time it's the weird people that are kind of like Nazi-esque, but there is also the overlap of these people being defensive of their culture because for generations people tried to erase it. And I think this conversation in some circles, in some Ukrainian circles, came up recently because some people hear the word nationalism when it comes, for example, to Ukraine and think of Nazism and stuff like this. When, for example, when it comes to Ukraine and many other Eastern European nations, it's the defensive kind of nationalism that stems from your culture basically being raised by other people. So just kind of wanted to clarify that because some people don't really know about this kind of differentiation, and in some contexts is very important what kind of thing we are talking about, because like I know in Poland there is definitely a group of those like Nazi-esque people, which is bad, but there is also the very patriotic people that are not toxic like that, just hold the traditions and history very deeply, and for some people it might be a little bit jarring. Yeah, basically
that's very true, and it was a good thing to add, because I tend to forget that, because in Portugal we were never really occupied. There wasn't really any foreign power coming in and trying to erase Portuguese culture. Any attacks on Portuguese culture came from ourselves and our different political regimes trying to mold it to something more friendly to that regime, but not so much from a foreign power trying to come here and erase our language and our traditions and replace them with something else. Even in the 60 years that we had Spanish kings, they were half Portuguese anyway, so they weren't really trying to erase Portuguese culture. And when they started getting a bit abusive, we kicked them out. So there wasn't really ever that kind of aggression against Portugal and Portuguese language and culture. So we kind of tend to forget that.
What is your like kind of take on this?
Oh, it's such a weird thing, because I feel like people, like, no one in the UK is from the UK. Like the Queen's German. Like she spoke German to what's his face. She only spoke English if she was with other English people. And it's really weird having these like British people going, oh, England, blah blah blah, British people, which is just racist code for white people, when none of them are from the thing about the UK is everyone is from somewhere else, and we stole everything, and it's just a weird amalgamation of cultures.
Yeah, the weird thing about the UK is like, I feel comfortable speaking about those things because like my people didn't really colonize anybody. We had like one colony very late into the colonialism thing that we only kept for 2 years because we were too poor to have a colony and we had to sell it to Germany. So we like, I honestly don't even know what happened there, because I'm pretty sure like there wasn't really slavery going on because we didn't even have the structure for this to exist. So some people don't even count it as a colony. So that is like very weird. For the majority of the history of my country was the one being colonized by others. So for me, nationalism isn't really like something that is that weird and hard to think. But like with Britain, if somebody told me, like if someone from Eastern Europe told me they're nationalistic, I'm gonna be like, ask some questions to try and figure out what kind of side or nationalistic that person is, and stuff like that. If a British person told me they are nationalistic, I would be like, oh, bad sign. This is pretty much colonialism. So I am going to head out from this conversation. Goodbye. Like this kind of thing. So I imagine it's a very different topic there.
Like everyone always talks bad about Britain, including Britain, because they did some horrible things. And then that's when I always joke when my people weren't even here yet, so I'm not even British.
Yeah, I think nationalism in Britain is something also very specific to Britain. You can't find their brand of nationalism anywhere else, because when it comes to the subjects of this symposium, dress and dress history, everyone everywhere, even non-British and non-American, non-native English speakers, everyone dabbles a bit in English dress, and we use English sources, and we don't think of those publications as nationalistic. But then you see that the UK is 4 different countries. It's England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And there is, you know, each one has their own nationalism.
Oh, Scottish nationalism is so interesting, actually. It's not like, I haven't come across people who are like problematic, but it's really funny. Like, as an English person, you might accidentally call them English because England, and they get very upset, which I understand. But from my perspective, they're all kind of the same. But I know they have their own different cultures. Like, all their ancestors were the same slave owners and colonizers, and they're all like, my brain has that weird thing where like I get the different countries, but like the history is all kind of the same in the horrible things they did to my people. But in a modern context, it's kind of funny because like the Scottish, it's people like really want you to know. It's in like a joke.
With Scottish people, it's also like I think with Scottish people, it's also like this kind of weird overlap. Like when I was talking about Orientalism, is that I mean they in the Great British Empire. So like they also participated in colonialism of different parts, but also the English kind of also occupied and low-key colonized them. So
and they were like, no tones for you for a bit. No.
Yeah. They're in a very weird part of this equation because
no speaking your own language.
Yeah, I feel like they have a right to do like the defensive nationalism because like they got it bad from the British as well, but like then you look at that other part of the history, where is the line? Because it's also like, where is the line between patriotism and nationalism? Like where?
Yeah.
Because is there toxic patriotism? I would like looking at people in my country, for example, I would say yes, because we have a lot of conservatives and the government is conservative. And I would say they are sure patriotic, but in a very toxic way. Can you be patriotic in a very healthy way? Yes, you can. Is toxic patriotism nationalism? Maybe, maybe not. It's kind of a weird line, I think, that depends on what you consider extreme. Because patriotism, I think, isn't extreme. Nationalism is extreme, but they are basically the same thing until some point where this becomes extreme. So that's also a weird thing.
Yeah, I think nationalism has a more dangerous tendency to distort history to fit their narrative. I had a really are you still online? Okay,
Yeah.
the images were frozen. I thought I think my internet is unstable.
Oh.
But yeah, the point I was trying to get to with the nationalism conversation in regards to our hobby of dress history and costuming is that because, you know, once you start looking into your own history and your own heritage, especially in Europe, you run the risk of running into nationalists because they always have an interest in history and they have an interest in morphing and molding history to fit their narrative. And I think for people that are starting to just dip their toes into their own history and trying to get interested in national dress and such, it can be a bit intimidating to even think that you might get associated with that crowd. And then if you have the bad luck of running into one of those, like I've had very recently, it's not a good experience. And having a conversation with someone that tells me that they're interested in Portuguese history, and then that's someone just going on in a huge monologue full of inaccurate facts, and ending up saying that the dictatorship we had was the best thing that could have happened to us. I was just, okay, this conversation is over and we're never having another. If I was a complete beginner, I was probably going to decide to just stay away from this viper's nest and just focus on more international or neutral stuff and not go specifically into Portuguese dress and Portuguese history, just to make sure I was staying away from that crowd. Luckily, I've been doing reenactment and historical costumes for a few years, but yeah, it's still a very, very unpleasant experience to have those kind of interactions. And I don't know if you ever had those, and I hope you don't.
I think I've never really had like a true nationalistic interaction when it comes to cost.
Okay, excuse me, I'm just going to turn off my camera.
Okay.
Hoping my internet will be faster because you're getting cut off. Okay.
So I haven't met anybody like that in CosTube specifically, but from just observing costume groups on Facebook, for example, I would say history overall, but I think CosTube specifically, especially, is kind of a weird blend of, we have quite a bit of those really nationalistic people, especially you can see it when it comes to, I think for me, I saw it when it came to the States and all the kind of like the colonial southern things. But we are also a community that weirdly, even though we have those people, we also have a lot of leftists. I don't even know if that's the right word. We have a lot of queer people, more open people, people that look into history because they want to learn about their communities in the past, because those communities always existed. So we have a lot of people that are kind of on very different sides of the spectrum. Thankfully, I have met more people that are more on that side. And I would say in general, for example, my audience is mostly on I have a lot of queer people in my audience. I would say generally I have people that are rather open-minded watching me. Though I must say I had also quite terrible experiences with people on this end of the spectrum, because I mean, nationalism is extreme, but you can also get very extreme, even if you're like generally a leftist person, you can still get very extreme and kind of lose your sight. Like I had very negative interactions with people that were based in English-speaking countries that consider themselves to be very open-minded, but the reality was that they were very open-minded in their specific place on earth. Like maybe they were open-minded by, for example, the standard of the United States, but did not understand anything connected to Eastern Europe at all when I tried to even mention it. And because of that, we got into conflicts, but because those people are so, they think so much higher of themselves as people that are open-minded, they will not even acknowledge the fact that maybe they're not so open-minded in every kind of situation, and some things may just be a bit out of their viewpoint generally. I think a person that thinks they know everything is, even if it's on that kind of spectrum, is also pretty dangerous, because nobody knows anything and we should just listen to each other instead of claiming that because we are open-minded we understand everybody, because we don't. That's the whole thing. So yeah, Sarah, I don't know if you are saying so. Okay, now I can hear you, because for a while I saw your
it was
frame lit
blinking,
up
but
and
I wasn't saying anything.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, you're right. Any very absolute, very extreme opinion is dangerous, no matter what side of the political spectrum it's from. Like all extremes are bad. All extremes can be dangerous.
I think it's important to kind of find, even though this is a niche, it's still important for people to find their own kind of group that they are sure that they can feel safe in, because for everybody it's gonna be slightly different, and maybe some people are just not for you, to be honest.
But you just gotta respect that and at least try to keep the dialogue open.
Yeah, definitely.
Were you saying something, Alisha? I'm sorry. Did we cut you?
Oh. No, it's getting near my bedtime, that's all.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, then I think we've pretty much covered everything we needed to cover.
Yeah, I think we
started very lighthearted and just ended in a very heavy subject.
Yeah, I mean, cultures are heavy in general, so it's always gonna get this way, to be honest.
That's true, and everything is a lot more nuanced and complex than it at first appears. So, but it's always nice, just because of all that nuance and complexity, to just sit down and have these sort of conversations. So
yeah, it was a very fun conversation. Although deep and sometimes a little bit dark, it was still very fun. It's nice to talk about those things because they are so broad.
Yes, and it was an absolute pleasure to have this conversation and this panel with you. I was so excited when you two said that hey, I have something to say about this. I can participate in your panel. And yes, I'm so happy.
I was very excited to see that someone will actually do a panel like this, because it's not a very popular topic in this community.
Yeah, I love complaining about language. So
yeah. Okay, we have 9 minutes left, so
we have 9 minutes left, and I think since we brought the language theme to the symposium, we should all just say goodbye in our language, or in our foreign language of choice, in your case, Alisha.
I remember this. I'm late.
So So since I'm going to switch off the recording, I'll probably be the last one.
Okay, so I can start off. Okay, cześć, żegnam was wszystkich i mam nadzieję, że się jeszcze kiedyś zobaczymy. So if anybody wants to know what I said is bye, goodbye to everybody, and I hope we will see each other again sometime.
Thank you.
Well, but see, the problem is I just normally ramble. I'm always just like, hasta luego, y buenas noches todos, y estoy muy cansada, which is just like, see you later, good night, and I'm really tired.
So, my turn. Obrigado por se juntarem a nós e até à próxima. Which means thank you for joining us and see you soon. Bye.